Yes.
This is sudden. Good afternoon. Hello, Mr. Lanning. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
How are you doing today, sir?
It's my room.
Busy as hell and trying to get moved in. I'm in Sedona, Arizona, which is
All right.
like one of the most beautiful places in the world, but the hardest to get construction done and all that rent houses.
That's
So
what you've been doing.
Believable.
yeah.
Let me be again to say welcome to Bop It Rift. This is a somewhat official Bop It fan server. We are a group of, well, let's just say fan maniacs who do a lot of projects and things like that. And I'm Blanky. I also go by TGR, Bop It artist. I'm aspiring graphic designer and voice actor. And fun fact, I actually have worked with you guys before. I'm the guy who did the Abe singing Jingle Bells for your holiday thing.
Oh, that was awesome. You did awesome.
Actually, let me be the first to say,
it's a pleasure to meet you, sir, no matter what they say.
Nicely done. Nicely done.
Sam's the one who got me into Abe, and I've been practicing my voice, and people have confused me for you.
It's an absolute pleasure to meet you. I'm very excited. We're all very excited, obviously.
Did you need something? Calm down. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
You're good.
Okay, you can hear me?
Thank you,
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we just
Great.
We didn't expect it to happen this soon, but we're glad you're here anyway, because a lot of people here have wanted to speak to you for a bit. So, if it's okay with you, we'll have everybody introduce themselves individually, and then just from there, just go about it. What we
Sure.
want to talk about.
Just so you know, I'm only gonna have a few minutes because I'm in the middle of a ton of stuff, but I'm happy to share that time with you.
Yeah.
Oh,
We're completely fine with that. So I guess first, we'll start off with Susie.
Hi, Susie.
Hello, Lorne. Yeah, my name's Susanna. I don't know if you remember me, but I believe that you have some of my work in your house somewhere.
Is it the dolls?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do have them. At the moment they're in storage because I'm moving. But those are wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, we love them.
Thank you.
There,
Thank you.
Susie. There's your dream come true. You're welcome.
How was your dream?
I just
Mr.
wanted
Lanning,
my
you
cake
and me-
when they got there.
Yeah, Mr. Lanning, you and me both. I actually just moved houses like a week ago. I just finished. Oh, hello, Mockingbird. Look who's here. She's okay. I guess next up we'll go to Sam.
Hey Lauren, I'm Sam, and I've been speedrunning Abe for many years now, and I've been part of this Discord server called Oddworld Speedrunning, which are now called Odd Speed Hangout, and we got some really good speedrunners in our, including Namesome. He's a really good runner at the moment.
Yep. Oh, sorry.
And I'm the one who's leading the project.
It's a little difficult to hear. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
I apologize about any background noise. I am currently leaving my internship job.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, you're gonna hear a lot of noise, and this is a very common thing for me. As I'm always on the phone.
Yeah, I can
You're
relate.
always on the phone, like always.
Aloof, you want to go?
I'm too excited.
Well, I can't blame you. There is one thing I want to point out, Lauren. Actually,
Sure.
if you do not, so this Discord server is also used by a lot of people who are visually impaired. They are blind. Most of them cannot see. Some have very limited sight. So someone on here does not have a profile picture. Just assume they are one of the blind people.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. And it's great that you guys have that community.
Yeah, we have a lot of community here. I work hard to strive for both IRL and Discord communities and things like that. And yeah, it's just a big thing. And this community, Bop It Rift, is probably my best work so far. Because look how much diversity we have here already.
Excellent. Well, it's interesting. My great grandmother was blind, and I only knew her for a short amount of time because I guess she died when I was about 8. But she was the one who told me, and I've given a couple of talks at different times years ago, and I sometimes started with a picture of her, and her eyes were completely white with cataract, and she was going through some surgeries, but I was just old enough that she was able to tell me that about seeing, and then seeing was more as much in the mind as it was in the vision, and that you had to see through what you saw to see the truth of things. And that's when she would tell me these stories. I was just a little kid. She'd go, but you can see more than what your eyes see. And this is the most important thing. And she was incredible woman. My mother was certain she had extrasensory abilities.
Yeah, when you lose one of your main senses, you build another one up stronger, basically.
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Or more. Yeah.
That's interesting because a lot of people here have driven, like, there are people here who work in IT and audio design and things like that because of how well they've developed their other senses when their visual senses have either left them or they weren't developed at all.
I would imagine for audio that'd be somewhat of a huge advantage, to pay attention to such details that other. As an audio director, I'm often challenged with, don't you hear this? And I'm working with people that hear fine. And they're like, no, what do you mean? Because we filter differently, right? We filter attention to detail differently. And even audio experts wouldn't hear certain things that I think, someone who's blind probably would. That's my assumption. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it. We actually have a blind musician who's worked on some things. There are some things here we want to tell you about that are Oddworld, but also not Oddworld. One of them is a game show. Are you familiar with? This is a big one. Are you familiar with the game show Press Your Luck?
I've heard about it, but I haven't been to it.
We do a lot of things like that.
Nice.
Yeah, we do a lot of fan games for it. We do a lot of gaming of it in general, thanks to Sam. Well, we'll talk about that. But for now, Sam actually has been doing this for years, but he wanted to talk to you about it, see if you like the idea. So, Sam, you can go ahead now.
So yeah, it's a game called Twice the Flavor, and it's based on Abe's Exoddus. It's like a tribute game to what people were like when we had that idea before Soulstorm about doing Exoddus, which he did like the idea of doing. But we got some really good voices in our team, haven't we, Sam?
Yes. So Sam's been wanting to here's. You know what? I'm gonna be honest with you. I really like Soulstorm. I love it. It's possibly one of Oddworld and Abe's greatest steps in the right direction. I love it a lot. But I get where Sam is coming from. Yeah, sure. But I think I'll just say it like this. I don't think people were expecting a sudden shift in mood and gameplay.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I can understand that. And it was a nightmare to develop. It was just incredibly hard. COVID made it 100 times harder. We were already in distributed development, but rather than cry about the challenges of the development, this is how I always saw Abe, and this is where I saw Abe going. He would start from a sort of humble beginning in a sense, and the gameplay would accommodate that in a simple, that was a very 90s style. And the idea was, if you think of it like Frodo in Lord of the Rings, Frodo just started off. He had a happy little life. He wasn't in the dangerous conditions that Abe was at the time, but his whole continent was going to be shortly, right? Like if the rings weren't returned and thrown into the volcano, the wrong people would have them, and it would mean terrible things for everyone across Middle Earth. And the idea of Abe was going to be, we started with something sort of innocent and it would play that way. And then over time, through the major arcs of the quintology pieces, it would become more and more intense, similar to the way that Lord of the Rings does. Very intense, very dark, and innocence faced against great real opposition. And that's one of the things, just to comment on this, that I loved about what Peter Jackson did with the series is I know I'm friends with the visual effects director who won all the Academy Awards with that. I used to work with him years ago, but he told me on the set, he said, Peter Jackson was adamant that every prop, every costume, all makeup, everything in this world was not a fantasy world. It was a historical recreation of a different world, but it had to be a historical recreation, the same way that Peter Spielberg would pay attention to details in Private Ryan about, World War II or the day, the D-Day landing, or, and that approach always appealed to me, in that Abe's journey, he was the embodiment of sort of innocence and an empathetic soul who didn't get corrupted, who didn't get beat down, who didn't get traumatized into being not as much as he could be. But his journey was going to take him to very intense, dark places. And that was always my idea. And that was largely driven by, the epic of an innocent soul and how dark the world can get beyond them. And so that was, I think for some people, aside from, play mechanics, or, we had a lot of bugs, and I wish we didn't, of course, but it happened. And, but that was the idea. And the next one would keep getting more intense. And when they find his mom, it opens up a whole nother level of intensity. And then ultimately it would turn into more of a biblical tragedy. But
I really hope you get going with that, Maestro.
Yeah. Yeah, that was something that I also noticed about. Sorry. I noticed something also about Soulstorm's gameplay is it's actually very similar to Stranger. Was that done intently?
You mean with the throwables and all?
Well, with the throwables, Abe talking to himself, like Stranger does, the double jump, It just seemed very similar.
Well, we wanted to try to. We figured out a lot of things for Stranger, basically a hint system that was his voice whenever you weren't talking to someone. And we were trying to implement some of those learns into Soulstorm.
That's
really cute.
Oh yeah, people
I couldn't.
Sorry about
that. That's all right.
My friend Bronson Poland has joined, who's a very talented animator who I've grown a very good friendship with, and I recently got him very into the Oddworld series.
Oh, excellent. Well, nice to meet you.
Yeah, he's getting everyone into it. I'm getting my family into it.
Oh boy. So Sam wanted to make Toys of Flavor because, you know what? He said something interesting once. I don't know if anybody ever told you, but do you know what he actually said?
Sam?
Yeah, Sam Lockheed. Do you know what he said once?
What did he say?
It's not the Abe I know.
Okay.
I found that interesting. Honestly,
fair, right?
Yeah.
But you also have, in the 1990s, we could only do so many things. The power of the systems was so low, right?
Yeah.
And then there was some annoyance of people's, they said it's not exactly the same voice. And in the beginning, it was kind of a mix between me, myself, and Josh Gabriel. And then our voices change over time. We're talking almost 30 years ago, So that would happen. But in terms of Abe, I think when you look at the cinematics and you just look at the story arc of Abe through the cinematics, you see it's in my opinion, it's the same Abe, more experienced with more trauma.
Yeah.
Like he's exhausted. You know, he's coming out of that, and then the world. He thinks things are going to get better, but they just keep getting worse. And every time he has a major triumph, it brings more of the powers that be perspective down on his head.
Yeah, that makes
I'm
sense.
so tired. We're all tired.
At least, you know, that's where it was coming from.
Yeah, that's interesting actually. If you think of it like that, I always because Soulstorm's supposed to take like place one day after New and Tasty, isn't it?
Yeah.
You
Yeah, it's happening in a 24-hour window immediately after.
That's interesting.
Well, it's a few days after, because at least newspapers will be able to print it, stories are circulating, rumors are circulating. So you know, exactly a day. It's the game itself is taking place within, you know, the limited amount of hours that the clock is sort of starting with. I think it's, what is it? How many hours before at the beginning?
It was like 12.
Yeah, 12 hours. So that was our projected time that this experience would take place. But this is basically a few days after. It's still like within a week after New and Tasty or Abe's Odyssey.
Right, and this is basically the real Exodus. We'll just say it like that.
That's right. And the original Exodus, this was in my intention to do, and then business circumstances forced something much faster immediately. Meaning I couldn't do what I wanted to do because of business, and this happens, you know.
Yeah, it's believable. No one's at their best when they're being rushed. Even though Exodus, I will say, it's still a great. It's a good game by itself. I can see where you're coming from. It has a lot of story elements that don't make a lot of sense, which I think Soulstorm does improve on. But to get that better story, the gameplay style was sacrificed for something a little different, which I respect.
Well, I wouldn't say. I tried to evolve it, and then we hit a lot of complications. And I tried to evolve it where you felt. I didn't want to lose the feeling of a journey through a massive world and large environments, but you were still largely in the twitch mechanics of side scroller, of a platformer, and then that platformer would go. We were calling it 2.9D, and then I just felt like a lot of the old puzzles get tired. Like Exodus was. We didn't have time to build new characters. We didn't have time to design them, right? So we only got a few new things, and then we had to figure out how do we reuse paramites and scrabs. And I was really just pulling out my hair with that. But that was, you know, for lack of a better word, survival. Because if we didn't do it, it would have led to a disastrous relationship, which kind of happened anyway, just from their own GT Interactive Zone challenges.
Yeah.
But
I've seen that with Infogrames, right?
Yeah, that's right. And Infogrames, bought GT Interactive is what happened, and that was when we were starting to make Munch's Odyssey.
Yeah, that's a question I want to ask. Was Munch supposed to be like? Was Munch supposed to be the next like main character like that Abe would be with somewhat? Yes, and what I was doing was Abe's arc was the primary arc, and then new characters would be introduced. And I was thinking of that in relationship to like a Marvel universe, where, you know, Superman, I believe, was Superman and Spider-Man were very early creations of Marvel, right? And then out of them, you would start meeting, you know, more bad guys, and then out of them, you would start meeting new good guys, new superheroes. And the evolution of that would enlarge a cast of potential lead characters. And there was a couple things, in all honesty, that I didn't understand very well at that time, which was in gaming, if you have a character that's a hit, don't
change to another central character as the main character in the game. Because just for the simple reason, people won't see Abe on the box. They won't see the name Abe on the box. You know, and so there was some naivety in some of those choices. But ultimately, Abe's arc was remaining the same. And I have to say, Munch's Odyssey went through a lot of necessity changes in the story that we didn't want to, that wasn't the story I wanted to tell, but you just had to do it because the technology wasn't running to do what I wanted to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
People have had those before.
Oh yeah, I think every game developer experiences this. But the more you want to really tell a story, the harder that story is to tell through games. Because because stories, if it was a novel, you're just writing words, right? And nothing can break that. And then it just needs to stay engaging. It doesn't need to stay play engaging, interactively engaging. But then when you make a game, you go, well, I've done this 7 times and it's boring already. You know, whatever the thing is. So both things have to be continually compelling. The story that pulls you forward and the gameplay that isn't getting boring. And that's where I felt like in the old Abe games, we were kind of running out. Like after Exoddus, we were kind of running out of a bag of tricks on the classic platformer. And at the time, no matter what, if you go back and you read the original reviews, we were getting slammed for being 2D and not 3D. Like most of the reviews that start off, they'd go, while not 3D, right? But Lara Croft's graphics are better. It's like, yeah. So every art director in Hollywood is laughing at that if you just look at frame by frame. And today it's clear, right? But back then, people were so so thirsty in gaming to see 3D because that was the real new thing that memory and power was bringing. That I think we were going to have a lot harder time getting financing on the next projects if we didn't go 3D.
That makes sense.
Yep. And if you're dealing with new consoles and you're trying to get some support of the consoles, now Munch wound up being a Microsoft Xbox launch title. If it was 2D, we never would have been able to have that relationship. They wouldn't have been interested because they were showing off a new 3D box.
Oh. Of course, now with the resurgence of 2D, since you got like games like New Super Mario Brothers, kind of starting that off.
Yep. And I think what really,
now,
just to comment on that, I think what really made that happen was mobile gaming. I don't mean specifically to Nintendo, but specifically to an audience's appetite.
Like phones?
Yeah, exactly. Mobile gaming with phones. Because that's where the 2D games became popular again.
Yeah, I was very relieved that Soulstorm was 2D again because I'm not very good at controlling a camera.
Yeah. Well, that's we were like, so for a shooter, camera control is really important, right? But for like Stranger, we wanted camera to largely be taking care of itself. As long as you were running where you wanted to go, you didn't really worry about camera unless you wanted a better view. And then you could always hit the right stick. Because I felt like by doing it that way, it also made it feel a little more like a journey with a smooth camera. And in many ways, it was really Mario's camera that we evolved upon, which I call a ball and chain effect, which is the camera is dragged behind the character. It's not on a pole where it instantly pivots if the character turns direction. They have more orientation the way you would experience a film.
Yeah, films are cinematic that way.
Yeah.
Forgive any background noise you hear. I'm getting slammed by rain at the moment.
It's 104 degrees here, just so you know.
Yeah. That's
Mr. Lanning, I actually have a question.
Sure.
I just would like to know, what was the main inspiration in creating Oddworld in the first place? Was it like an epiphany? Was an idea? Were you already in the gaming industry when you came up with it, or did you have to learn?
No.
Essentially,
the first game I ever made or even worked on was Abe's Odyssey, and the reason I wanted to make games was The truth is, I'm primarily driven by stories and characters. And I was looking at ways to accumulating and building lots of stories. My favorite author was Orwell, George Orwell. Oh, yeah. And I was blown away as a little kid at how, as a little kid, I read Animal Farm in junior high, in elementary school. We were, I think in 5th grade, I read Animal Farm, and I found it just really fascinating, you know, but I didn't necessarily understand a lot of its implications. And then it was read again in high school along with 1984. And that blew my mind because of the importance and of the warning, you know, the kind of 1984 was a warning, right? And it was like, if you let these things happen, if you let these people go this way, this is what will happen to you. And because my own family had a lot of, there was a lot of murders of my ancestry, and it took place under the Bolsheviks during the Russian Revolution. And so a lot of my family was, members of my family was murdered, and who knows what happened because they just disappeared in the middle of the night. And so my grandfather would tell me these stories because he had immigrated from Latvia basically as a child laborer at the time. And these are like, these histories should be talked about more than they are. And I just knew it because I heard it on my grandfather's lap. And so having that drive, I was thinking of stories that would have that type of impact, but we had different problems today than the problems they had then. And so in shaping those stories, I wanted to shape them around the threats that we live with today. And so that became, you know, the irony of the Happy Face logo is cutting down all the rainforests, right? For cheap meat for fast food companies. So it's like, people didn't know that. I would talk to really intelligent Ivy League grade people, and I'd say, well, you know, cheap meat, the Happy Meal is what's, you know, burning down all these rainforests. And they were, what are you talking about? You don't know. It's just absurd, you know. And you're like, no, actually, you're clueless, and you don't have a clue what you're talking about. This is real.
They're like Gluckins then.
They're like what?
Gluckins.
That was the Gluckin inspiration.
Exactly. So that became inspiration, you know. And then the idea was that to create a universe, kind of like Animal Farm, where species represented archetypes of human nature. So we'd say these, you know, we'd say a species. So the Gluckins became sort of the greedy middle tier, the tier that would be bred to run companies and things like that. But it's not the top tier. It's actually pretty far from it. So as people were thinking about like Abe's Odyssey, they were saying the Gluckins are the ultimate bad guys that control Oddworld. And the answer is not even. And you find out there was an old Bob Dylan.
So there's a bigger threat?
Well, the Gloctagai are above the Gluckins, right?
Wait,
and the Gluckins are
Gloctagai are above Gluckins?
Yes.
Oh, I never thought about that, honestly. Because here's the thing: like when you see Secto, you don't really think about it.
Yeah, because he was kind of like a bit in exile, like a gangster who. You guys ever watch Billions?
A little bit.
Okay, well, in the series Billions, there's a case where a billionaire is going to get arrested in America, and then he just winds up fleeing the country, and he winds up in Switzerland with German private guard. It's all like special forces and shit.
I would. Does that make Secto like? Does that make him part of the Magog cartel then?
Closer to, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So the Magog cartel is more Gloctagai than Gluckin. So it's the difference between a CEO and a bank owner. The CEO is still going to the bank, right? The bank doesn't go to the CEO. The CEO goes to the bank. He's trying to raise more money. He's trying to do this, but the bank's at the top of the pyramid, or the owners of the bank, of the financial system are at the top of the pyramid. The people that are running companies, they're really just the lapdogs for the biggest, the most powerful people, because they don't need to do that. They have little lackeys called Gluckins and Gloctagai that do all that. And then there's characters above the Gloctagai. So there was an old Bob Dylan song back in the Vietnam War, and it went, just when he thought he was king, he was realized he's a pawn. And you realize there's almost, do you remember X-Files?
Oh, Sam, X-Files?
Yeah.
Okay, so in
That
X-Files,
predates some of us.
yeah, sorry about that, but you should watch it because it's an unbelievable series. So
Yeah, but don't get Sam started, otherwise the Illuminati talk is coming back.
yeah, I'm well versed there. Yeah, but so in the X-Files, as a comparable, you would think that these people were the most powerful. The cigarette, you'd realize there was someone controlling the FBI, but they weren't in the government. And it was the cigarette smoking man. And then as time goes on, you learn the cigarette smoking man is just a lackey for someone else. Right? Like you think you know who's king, and then you find out the king is working for someone else. And that was the model of that. So in Oddworld, with each quintology, you get deeper and deeper and deeper into a higher management system, a higher order that they're being obedient to. So it's very much like the Illuminati model.
Oh,
boy!
Yeah.
Don't get Sam started. Please don't.
Don't tell Sam because he thinks they're trying to destroy the world, take his fault sometimes.
Well, you never know. What I say about the super riches, they're not like that.
Actually, I do have another question for you personally.
Sure.
So when you see like fan work, like as one of the things here, Twice the Flavor, or like that one horror game, Oddworld Smile Factor. What do you see? Do you see like people adding to your invention, like adding like more context to your world, or do you see it as a one-off? What do you see?
Possibly abusing emails.
I like to think it's kind of like ultimately at the end of the day more of a if people are inspired by these things and they want to do their own derivative on top of that, as a result of that, I think I've always been hugely, as an entity, we've always been hugely supportive of that. Where it gets complicated is if you're giving me ideas and I use those ideas, that becomes legal complications of ownership. So you'll see a lot of the history of music is a lot of people sue and they say, you got that song from my lyrics, or you got that riff from my song, or there's a long legacy of where did you get the content from. And through the years, there's been a lot of people who said, look, I have a really great idea for Oddworld. I said, don't tell me. Don't tell me. Because I don't want to know, because I might already have that idea. And if I do, you're going to say it's your idea. I mean, I'm saying if someone wanted to get, combative about it or hostile about it. Like, I said, so if I'm not fielding ideas, you can't accuse me of taking your idea. And so I've always looked at it that way. And a lot of people and fans through the years have said, I got a great idea for it. And I was like, you can do it as fan art, but you shouldn't, in a way, you shouldn't tell me, because maybe I already have it. And this is kind of like venture capital. So people think that I'm going to, those of you who, are dealing in business and stuff, you go, I'm going to show you an idea, but I need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And there's not an investor in the world that'll sign that agreement unless you're already a huge entity and you're showing something really special like the iPhone and it's not out yet, and you're Apple, and you say to the press, to the bank, to whoever, we'll show you something, but you have to sign this. Then you really have something and people would be willing to sign it. But for like venture capital who finances ideas, they will never sign a non-disclosure agreement for regular people because they might already be working on that. And if they show it to you, then you could come back 10 years later and said, that was my idea. And so it just gets, I don't like the way the legal aspects work, but they're very real. And so you have to be cautious of that, because if I say, hey, send me all your ideas, and then I pick out a few of those ideas and start using them a game, you could have a claim that was your idea. right? And this is where the trademarks and the copyrights and the ownership gets really particular. So while, people have sent me, and even good, like professional writers have said, hey, I got this idea about Oddworld. As long as we're doing the development and we're not contracting out to other teams for ideas, I shouldn't hear it. You just shouldn't tell me. And then if I do the same thing, you'll know it's the synchronicity of human thought and condition on the world at this point in time, where they call it zeitgeist. It's the zeitgeist, but it's not that I stole something from someone. And I never wanted to be accused of that. And coming from Hollywood, I saw a lot of that. And whether people were guilty of it or not, the accusations would be made. And the best way to avoid those accusations is you don't field ideas.
Right. Oh no! I've just realised that in my letter to you, I suggested some ideas for a sequel to Soulstorm. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. But you'll see my comments back would be limited. It'd be like, well, that's nice, but and it's careful. And I've had big, I won't mention names, but big, famous directors like at the top 10 in the world. I've presented ideas to, and then later I hear about from someone else. They go, "Wow, so and so told me this idea, this film he wants to make," and I'm like, "Really?" Because I pitched that to him, and he wanted to direct it, and now he's representing it as his own, And I won't say who, but that's happened.
All right.
WOF.
That's interesting. Actually, there's been a similar story. So Dan Klitzner, a man who invented Boppet, who's also on this Discord, has actually told us something similar that has happened with a few other things. Except, he's literally said to them, you don't think I've come up with ways to, make Boppet, different? There were a few clones that he's told that we talked about at that session, which was in 2021 of July, which we can send you the video. By the way, are you okay with this being recorded? Because we just do it for YouTube. We don't sell this off to anybody. It's just for YouTube, just for people to see.
Sure,
things like that.
I'm okay with that, and thanks for telling me.
Yeah. It's just a clarification. But so Dan Klitzner, by the way, really nice guy. So he's told us something similar, there were people who made this game called the Silly Sausage and the Super Click It, and he went out and they were sued and things like that. He's like, you don't think I've come up with it's unoriginal? And people keep sending him ideas like we've already thought of it before. In fact, actually, I have one of how I would end the original Quintology. I was going to share the button. I'm not sure if I should now, but it's just
yeah. Yeah, because I do have a very specific idea of where it goes, and that's also just part of, you don't put it out there until it's time. I've thought about in May complete the story in graphic novel form, so that the whole Quintology could be put out very quickly and not at the speed of game development. So that's a challenge I've always had. Is game development is really low.
I think the majority of us would love to see Abe sneaking around Nollybab, and there's hundreds of Mudokons everywhere, or Gluckons everywhere.
It's going to get intense.
That's how I imagine the next game to be.
Yeah.
When he said, we're going to go to Nollybab, it's so full of Gluckons, and I was like, oh boy, it's about to get real.
Yes. Provided I live long enough to do it, it'll get more and more intense that way. Where, they become like terrorists in hiding, even though they're not terrorists. They have to sneak around.
They're seen as terrorists.
They're labeled as terrorists because they're a threat to a corrupt power structure. And that's history. Anyone who resisted Rome was called a terrorist. Right?
I actually, for many years, I always, my brother is a huge Oddworld fan. He was the one who introduced it to me. When I got introduced to Oddworld, I always saw it as an otherworldly version of the story of Moses in a way. With its changes and some similarities to it, but you have your own original ideas. Moses was not originally a slave, like Abe was. and there was no company and everything. But I the only similarities I saw was Abe leaves like Moses does. He gets spiritually powerful. He becomes trained to be able to save all the Mudokons in the factory, and that's what Moses does. He leaves first, and then he comes back for the slaves and frees them.
That's right. And who was Abraham?
Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah, so Abraham was the father of monotheism in that tradition, right? And who wrote about Abraham? The 5 books of Moses.
5 books, yeah.
Oh,
so
my
Moses
God.
carried
comes from?
Abraham's story.
No, it's a good stuff.
It's been a while since I read the Bible.
Is that what 5 is?
Excuse me?
Is that what the significance of the number 5 is in the Quintology?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
I just thought that if I did it right, the story was so big it wouldn't fit in 3, like Lord of the Rings or so.
Because every time the number 5 pops, I see.
If
Imagine
I
if Moses had the
That's
birds
interesting.
portal like Abe. You could just get all the slaves out.
Yeah, and so I wanted it to, for lack of a better word, be biblically proportioned in its escalation. And then classic myths. I mean, whether it's out of the Hebrews or the Christian faith or the Muslims or the Buddhists or you have Islam or out of India with the sorry, I just woke up shortly ago. Is it just slipped me. That's embarrassing. There's only a billion of them on the world. Hindus, right? But in each of these stories, you usually have one or the other characters that originate with nothing or everything, right? So you have like this Buddha. In the beginning, it was Buddha was the first Buddha was like a prince, right? Who had become, empathetically connected to a kingdom that as a prince he was separated from. And Hindus have many of these heroic characters that in their mythology that start in similar ways. Some are either gods that descended or some are kings that had changes of heart, or some just originated out of nothing as ultra common. And I was just always inspired by those stories where someone could come from nothing and change the world. And that we find that a lot in the religious texts. And for whatever reason, we may say, well, if we don't believe that these stories have happened, then at least in great storytelling, great stories are with characters that sort of suffer through and tremendous arc from who they thought they were to what they become. And so I was always motivated by that sort of mythological proportion. That I was talking one time to a writer who I just love. His name was David Franzoni, and he wrote Gladiator. And he said when he was reading about ancient Rome, and he produced it as well, the movie. When he was reading about ancient Rome, he was reading about this one Roman general, basically, that had been betrayed by the emperor and turned into a slave. So he went from a general who had tremendous power to a slave that was traded into fighting for their death as a living, fighting for their life as a living in gladiator events, who would eventually kill the emperor. And when he read that story, and we were talking, he said, and that's when I knew I had that myth proportion where someone was somebody important. He was a general, and then he became the worst of a nobody, which is a slave. And then the slave, as a slave, he killed the emperor and changed the history of Rome. That's basically a biblically proportioned myth. It's the magnitude of a religious myth. But I think that's why. And different people will view them differently. Is it a creation to tell a story, or is it an actual events that happened? And across the spectrum, it's always has a similarity, which is these people do superhuman things and then set examples for us to follow or to avoid. Right? Like in the Hebrew tradition, or in the Old Testament for the Christians, you had Solomon, right, who became king of the world. And even though supposedly he had this relationship with the heavens, with God, he kind of lost track of that, right, and was seduced by wives and went very dark and did dark things, right? So is that really what happened? Did a man really have a relationship with entities, the almighty entity? Or is that a great way to shape people's thoughts on, whether they should be good or bad? Where does it take them in life?
Was Noah's flood caused by the end of the Ice Age and the sea levels rising?
I'm sorry?
That's a theory I've heard. I've heard this theory of floods being caused by the end of the Ice Age and the sea levels rising and coming back into the Black Basin, which would have been a desert at the time.
I've been really fascinated by those stories and accounts as well, because almost every religion in the world and every indigenous culture, almost verbatim, has stories about a great flood and boats with animals. So there are different names in different places. And if due to the melting of the ice caps, and I had a theory on that, maybe you find it interesting, but my theory was, if it was due to the ice caps melting, then smart people saw the water approaching. And everyone was self-sufficient in this time back when, they didn't have mass agriculture and refrigeration and trains to deliver things. So everyone had farms, everyone raised animals, everyone grew food. And if you knew that you were on land that was, if you're watching the feet rise 5 feet every year or 10 feet a year, you'd say, we need to design a plan and get out of here. So it makes sense to me that if in the history of the world, this is just my own sort of logic of it, if in the history of the world, the melting of the ice age increased the water rise of the oceans, then people would have naturally tried to build boats that could take their animals with them. So if and people all over the world weren't cavemen, they were smarter, right? They knew how to grow and they knew how to tend animals. They would have known that their sustenance would rely on that. So all over the world, if the oceans were actually rising, there would have been many sort of Noahs, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Right. So it makes sense that if this was experienced globally, it would be left as a remnant of all cultures' history.
Yeah.
That's interesting to think about, honestly.
Yeah, so I thought a lot about that, because actually I wanted to work in something like that in the quintology, but you'll find that out later, maybe.
I didn't know about that until you told me. That's interesting.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, if you listen to someone like Randall Carlson, who's proving that several asteroids hit the Earth within a relatively small period of time, and we had 1,000 or even taller tidal waves hitting continents. That would have wiped everything out overnight, so it would have been hard to build a boat and see it coming, unless some divine source gave you that divination insight, to see the future. So I thought, like, if it was asteroids, if it was the polar ice caps melting, lots of people would have figured out they need to build boats with animals on them. And if it was a sudden overnight, no one would have had the time. And if someone did, then they had some way of seeing the future that the rest of us weren't granted,
I have actually a question about Soulstorm, about character.
Sure.
Hello. How's it going?
Hi.
But so the guy who created Oddworld is here, Lorne Lanning.
Oh, so I noticed.
Yeah,
I don't know.
So
right in the middle of the question, please finish your question.
Yeah.
And hello.
One thing I want to know, I've been asking myself this, and no one ever knows. In Soulstorm, where's Big Face?
I second that question.
Yeah. So, you don't see them, and the idea was that we wanted to meet more sages. It wouldn't be like there was one sage, one mystic, one shaman. There would be more of them. There would be an underground culture of them staying connected.
Well, what if we have a zombie apocalypse?
Excuse me?
Well, what if we have a zombie apocalypse? How do you think people would adapt to it?
Well, some would argue, it's happening right now, right? If you were in Syria 7 years ago, it might as well have been the apocalypse.
Yeah. So you wanted to have like more of a spiritual presence in Soulstorm, meet more. So Big Face was the first one to meet, and he would meet like deeper after.
Yeah, and then later there would be opportunities where these are coming together at secret meetings and things like that, and then we see characters that came along the path. But ultimately, one that had really become something extraordinary would become a keeper. And so that's where in Soulstorm we tap into the memory of the history of the world. And so that's in the catacombs, Abe encounters, and he's told to find the keeper, and he's given the amulet to find that keeper. And when he finds the keeper, we find out it's really a catacomb burial place for thousands of keepers throughout history, but they're not dead yet. And this is something that is very interesting in the Buddhist tradition. They're finding more and more mummified remains, or just not mummified in the way that the Egyptians mummified, but just something that mummified over time, like a lizard in your garage or something, right? Mummified remains of monks that are in their meditation pose. And then throughout history, they've taken those entire monks and then gold-plated them. And you'll find these things if you Google search for them. And what the other living monks and Dalai Lamas had said over time is, don't cut it open. Don't destroy it. Leave it alone. Kind of like a Native American, like, don't mess with the burial grounds. And they're saying because their consciousness is still alive. They transcended in their meditative state through death, and their consciousness is still alive. And that's why their body was able to remain preserved. So this is a thing that if you search gold-plated mummies of Buddhist monks, you'll find them, right? And the idea that something could retain its memory of history and still be accessible was the idea of the catacombs. And so the catacombs is kind of like a library of the actual memories of the people who witnessed the events on the earth, and not all the lies that got written in the books and taught in the classes after. The actual witnesses to the events, not the power structures that rewrote history, the ones that served their own purposes, but from the actual victims and the actual witnesses throughout the history of the world. They would be that would be accessible in the catacombs, and one keeper at a time takes over the role of the previous one, and all of those that are encased in that meditative form and nurtured by the bees, each one of those had been a keeper, like the female that we see that Abe meets in Soulstorm.
I see.
Sokushin Butsu, is that the ritual that they use to self-mummify themselves?
They would do it through meditation until they died, and they would die in that state, but they didn't really die.
Oh.
And then the bees would take care of them.
Bees?
Okay.
The bees.
Yeah.
So it's a lake of honey.
Oh.
The lake in the catacomb is a lake of honey. And the way that those rocks were designed, we haven't seen this yet, but at different times, the tide, the height of the honey, would be the thermometer for the health of the planet. So if the bees were very low, the honey pool would be low, and the planet would be going through dark times. But if the tide of that catacombs and the honey was high, and in the stones we we don't see things that we wanted to get in because of time and energy and story focus. But the idea of those rocks was that depending on how high the Lake of Honey was, if it was really high, the only faces you would see would be kind of blissful and joyful. But as it went down and got really low, those faces carved in the stones would become more horrific and suffering. So it was kind of a living thermometer for the health of the planet.
That makes more sense, honestly. And does it affect how badly would it affect living things if it started going down? What do you think? Like in Oddworld specifically?
Well, just think of it just like bees, right? So right now we have a problem with bees, right? We have forces trying to scare everyone into believing that you and carbon are the cause of the decline of the planet, and if we just give politicians enough money, they'll fix it for us. But at the same time, no one's talking about the bees, which is being killed by the pesticides and possibly other reasons. But
oh my goodness, I know that feeling.
If we don't have the bees, we don't have life on this planet, right? The bees are a far greater crisis than any other pollution because they pollinate, and without pollination, we don't have food. So the irony of the times we live in, right? The real issues are not really on the table. It's the ones that someone wants us to think about, wants us to be afraid about. That's what gets the airtime because someone has to pay for it. And I asked this question of anyone, right? Just think about it. Who gets paid millions and millions of dollars a year to tell the truth?
Nobody.
Oh, I have a question. How did dogs get evolved to how they are now? We have millions of breeds of dogs.
What's that got to do with anything?
It's history.
That's a polo moment.
That's a severe polo moment.
That's a history question.
You mean creation versus evolution, or you mean how would evolution?
Mark, shut up. Sorry, I'm at home right now, and my brother, being as he is going to interrupt him.
What's a polo moment?
But you got to know, I've only got a few moments left.
That's fine. I guess my final thing so you're okay with us doing TZF? We're not saying hey, let me switch to my Mac.
Yeah, what's important is anywhere that you're doing it's recognized as a fan creation. It's unofficial. Kind of like a biography. Unofficial. If you said these things are purely done for nonprofit purposes. I imagine is that they're being sold, but the money's going straight towards good things in the world, or how is that seen? Is it sold, or is it given away to a community, or?
Well, I think I'll let Sam take that.
Yeah, it's a game that it's like a game that people can play. Yeah, it's definitely a not-for-profit kind of game. Yeah.
Okay, so not-for-profit, it means something very specific in the United States, which is every foundation, like Cancer Cure or American Medical, research companies, they're all not-for-profit, but the CEOs still make $1 million a year, right, or more. So the not-for-profit means you're not selling it, or it's in the realm of you're doing good for people, and so we don't keep a profit, but proceeds go to a blind foundation, or is that how you're thinking about it, or is it you're just giving it away, meaning you're not selling it?
We're just giving it away. It's going to be a free-to-play game.
That makes it way easy. See, that's the easiest.
Oh my god!
Actually, all of our games are free to play. Like one of the other games we're doing, not just Twice to Play, but we're doing something called NJ Rockout, which is a remake of a game Dan Klister made called New Jam Guitar. He said we could do that because, well, number one, it's going to revive a project he wanted to succeed strongly. Number two, we don't get in trouble with Hasbro. So all of our games are going to be even the original games we make, they're going to be free to play no matter what, because we're not a big project company, we're passion project people.
So if under the table, under the main title, Twice the Flavor or whatever it may be, you say something like an unofficial fan created experience.
And actually had someone do that.
Helps
Yeah.
protect it. Yeah, that helps protect it.
And Sam actually had someone do that, and like NJ Rockout and things that come after it, there's going to be a disclaimer at the beginning of the game that says, we don't own the rights to this game. We don't have any budget by them. We're not working with them. Oddworld Inhabitants owns all assets and characters used in this game, and etc. We're not employed.
The trademarks. You would own the characters, but the databases, because you're building them and you're not selling them. But basically there's no trademark. The trademarks and copyrights are owned by Oddworld Inhabitants. But if you build your own little Abe, you own it.
Yeah, we have.
If you want to scale it and start selling it, that's where it gets really complicated legally. And that's
Susie,
trademark protections.
Susie actually denied, like she does Abe plushes. In fact, she made me one for my own story.
So the thing is, if you're selling them like on Etsy, and you only make a few handcrafted things, it's not enough to, as they would say, show up on the radar, right? As long as you're doing like unofficial fan, and I make these things, I make Darth Vaders and I make Abes and I make these things, but they're plushy toys, and I only sell X number of a year. There's no big business here with that. You skate, right? You're under the radar. If it's something that starts becoming Chinese manufactured and going into stores, that's where it creates big problems.
I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that anyway. I don't want to take any money from you.
The reason for this is if this is just the legal world.
I apologize. Keep in mind, Blake is visually and audibly impaired and does need the loud sounds.
Okay, understood. So I'll say this piece, and then I guess I could do one more question, then I'll have to go. But you hear the tools in my background; it's all construction. But so what happens is, if it looks like it came from us, but it didn't, and we didn't stop it, we lose the ability to defend ourselves in courts of law when there's real trademark violations. So let's say someone started building a business out of it, and we didn't cease and desist them. We didn't say, we recognize you're doing this, but you have to stop doing that. If we didn't do that, and then later, let's say a big Chinese manufacturer starts making our toys en masse, and we try to stop them through law, through lawyers, the judge would look at our history and say, have you stopped people in the past? And if someone can say, look, these two other things were doing it, and so why they're not doing what they need to do to protect their trademarks. And then you wouldn't have a case against the Chinese manufacturer. And I'm just using Chinese as an example because they have massive manufacturing, and do a lot of knockoffs. So that's what happens is, and I didn't know this till after I started the company, but they're like, look, you can't just let that slide because you weaken your strength of the trademark. And then if you let that happen, other people can just start using it and you won't have any defense. So that's where that becomes tricky. So if you label it the way you do, especially in a name, an unofficial fan, creation, something like that.
The unofficial Abe game, he likes to call it.
Yeah, that's fine. And then you have the title screen, like you're talking about, where you have a little more legal definition of, this is what we're not trying to do. It's not this, it's not that, it's not that. It's just fan creation. And then if people are playing it, that's all fine.
I think now I'm a little hesitant to voice myself because people confuse me for you, and I don't want you to get bombarded with people like, why did you voice this game? Can you voice my game? Like, people are going to start bombarding you, so I'm not sure if I should voice it myself.
Yeah, voice it yourself.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like,
if I voiced it, I'd create a problem for myself.
If I've been confused so much, you don't even know. I don't even know. What are we doing here?
I have no idea.
Well, me and you both.
Actually, people have here's the thing. I didn't know when I was forming my voice, you used a voice modifier for Abe, and that's what I didn't realize. So my Abe is
I could bring it down to your level if I wanted to, but I'm not.
So if you did that, and then you pitched it up a little bit, and then if you pitch it up a little bit, it's going to speed it up, and you get the chipmunk effect, and then you stretch it back out to the original duration. Like, it's easier for me to have pronunciations at the lower tone, and then we do that. We pitch it up, and we stretch it back out. So then it has
You didn't do
better
that for Soulstorm.
clarity of articulation. Excuse me?
You didn't do that for Soulstorm.
Yes, we did.
Well, Abe's voice was definitely a lot deeper in that game than previously.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's
He's
a
also
bad
going
thing.
through
though.
a heavier trip.
Yeah.
It was pretty
I
heavy.
had
game, great.
Yeah, when I was hearing your voice samples, like I started actually with Exoddus because that has a lot of expression in it, like Soulstorm. But when I heard that, like I didn't know you modified it, and
So this voice is completely natural. I have to learn how to bend it properly, but I do what I can.
But it's pretty great.
I mean, like if I could,
maybe you don't have to, but I had to. Yeah.
If I can get people to confuse me for you, I'm like,
You're in good shape.
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if I did the voices in a fan game, that would be a problem.
But if I did, like, they would still ask if it was you, but they'd have to confirm it. I would have to confirm. Right. I actually had to do that. During the Jingle Bells parody, a lot of people were saying, Lorne, why is Lorne pulling off that high of a voice? Why is Lorne, that's not you.
Right. But don't worry, it's like, hey, if I could do Bugs Bunny perfectly, I would.
And that's all you need to know.
That's very good.
Yeah, I've actually been asked to recite a lot of lines like,
"This is Necrum."
Oh, what I say, Sam?
Oh yeah, you can also do direct to play, can't you, Sam?
Oh gosh, So for Twice the Flavor, we have a voice cast actually. One person, believe it or not, so one person that is somewhat involved in it is Mike Pollock, who is the voice of Dr. Eggman in the Sonic the Hedgehog games. He said he'd be fine to do it because here's the thing: it's going to be the same story.
Well, see, he's not the IP owner.
No.
So that's why it's easier for him to do it.
No. But
yeah,
yes, he wants to do. He can only do it though as long as we have the okay to do it. That's his rule.
Of course.
So,
well, that's not his rule. That's the IP he was paid to do it for his rule. The company that it's Insomniac, right?
Right. Sorry, I'm not good with this.
Sega.
Sega. My bad.
Not even Sega. Actually, it's not even Sega. He's not doing his Eggman voice. Actually, he's doing. So
okay. The only thing, guys, I have to cut this short because I have to run. I have to get some people paid. Right. But
no problem.
I'm open to doing this again.
Thank you for making
Hey, Mr. Lanning, thank you so much for coming. Listen,
thank you very much, Lorne.
Flop and Rift is a completely open server. You can do whatever you want here. You can come whenever you want. You can talk to whoever you want. We're always here, always active. You can send us friend requests. Be sure to talk to us.
Let's schedule another one. We'll do one in the near future.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're more than happy to do that. If you're lucky, you might need Jake Klitzner.
Okay. All right. You got it.
Right.
Okay. We'll talk.
Well then, Mr. Lennox. See you then.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Ciao.
See ya. Bye.
Have a nice day.
Yeah. Bye, Sam.
Oh. Okay, Sam. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead, Sam.
We did it.
Yes, Sam.
Yes.
We did it, Sam.
Yeah.
And for that, I'm gonna play this now.
Huh?
Oh boy.
Woo!
Oh my god.
We got Lorne Lanning.
You know what, Bundy? I can't. Wow.
Hang on, Sam. Is Sam the freelance of
Yes. We got Lorne Lanning, everybody.
Who's calling my name?
I think it was Crispy.
Crispy, you call my name?
Yeah. I'm actually shocked that you actually got the creative artwork Oddworld over to the server.
Yeah, now he's on our Discord server, and now, Sam, I know exactly what I'm going to play next. Ready for this?
Yeah.
Susie, you can keep your camera on. We're all excited now.
It seems like your fanboyism is already showing.
Wait, Sam, your camera's not visible on Discord.
Hey?
There he is. Actually, no, I'm seeing 3 dots.
We got Lorne Lanning, yeah! And what would you say? Alright! You got Lorne Lanning!
This is screaming pressure luck.
It's fresh your luck!
You know what?
What?
You know what? Let's do a celebratory game right now. Let's do a celebratory game right now, I say.
Oh, come on, I'm looking for
A celebratory game of pressure luck? Let's
Well, I
do it.
gotta
Come
go,
on.
guys, because I'm gonna go to bed.
Sam, you have a good night.
Yeah!
Okay, Sam, so just edit those two together and upload the video.
Okay.